Apologies for the delay in getting this video completed and uploaded to YouTube, but something about CQU's structure that you probably don't realize that makes it quite hard for me to do these videos, and that I live in an open plan office in a skyscraper in the middle of Brisbane. When I say live, I do spend too many days a week. Today's a Sunday, and finally I'm at peace and can record without bothering my colleagues around me. It's just an example of how the structure of an organization determines aspects of your ability to do work. And it's worth thinking about organizational structure in that way as something relatively fixed about an organization that controls both positively and negatively the parameters of how we work. Let's see if I can get my slides going. A structured company with specialized roles is something that offers a number of advantages for the organization. And this is something that emerged in particular at the beginning of the last century, over 100 years ago now, when companies like Ford started to experiment with the possibility of breaking complex professions such as making a car or coach building, as it used to be before the invention of the horseless carriage, breaking it into small components. And they found a number of very important advantages. It increased efficiency, it increased manageability, it reduced the cost of training to individual staff members, and allowed people to become very good at what they were doing, or at least or alternatively to do the things at which they were very good at doing and not do the things they were not good at doing or didn't want to do. In theory. Just zooming in and having a look at this for a minute. If you think about it, if you do a simple task and do it repetitively, it speeds up. It allows you to more rapidly speed up, so you can go from just managing to being a master at a particular task if you do it frequently. It's good advice for you as a student or me as a lecturer to, for example, I'm doing a lot of these videos in a row now, and I do find that by doing a single task repetitively, my efficiency and to some degree perhaps my quality improves. Manageability. If you have to keep an eye on a group of people just doing one or two simple tasks, the ability for a single manager to have a good overview of what the staff are up to, whether they're doing it correctly or not, improves. Whereas if you are attempting to manage a group of people who are doing highly complex tasks, it's more difficult to even see whether they're making an error, let alone whether they're achieving a level of mastery. Naturally, training improves. It's much easier to train people in a small atomized task than in a complex, multifaceted task. And this issue of allowing staff to do the things they're good at, I think it's probably more fair to say that within highly structured companies, what happens instead is that people do become better at doing things because those things are simpler to do. However, what happens in practice is work becomes, while it becomes efficient, it also becomes highly predictable and becomes, if anything, quite a bit disempowering and boring. This is something that Ford found at his factory. At one stage, he was facing mass walkouts at the Ford factory. This is back in the Model T days. And he rectified or dealt with that problem by doubling wages, which had a very positive effect on retention of workers. I don't know if it made them feel that the work was less boring. In practice, highly structured organizations, and I'm not talking about specialized tasks, but highly structured organizations tend to be difficult to move. They're not very dynamic, quite inflexible. They can be quite expensive when what happens is that layers and layers of bureaucracy get added to companies, and red tape becomes an end in itself within an organization. Following proper procedure and documenting procedures becomes an end in itself. And as I hinted before, the work can be disempowering. There are some contingencies. Basically what contingencies means in this particular setting is that things that complicate the picture a little bit. On the other hand, issues that are, you could say, on the other hand, under these circumstances, under these special circumstances, or these special contingencies, blah, 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 blah. Okay, let's have a look. So, the two kinds of structure extremes that we often talk about within the literature are organic versus mechanistic. Organic, like the sound suggests, is it is like an organism. So it grows and shapes itself in a unique manner to suit the environment. And not surprisingly, organic structures are better suited to dynamic environments, while the opposite extreme is mechanistic, like a machine. And they tend to work well with stable, consistent conditions. And then complex versus simple environments. So complex environments tend to require that you decentralize an organization. And by complex environments, we're talking about diversified environments like the United States market, for example. There's a huge difference between Texas and California, between New York and North Carolina, in terms of the kind of market drivers in those particular settings in the US, or the kind of product demands, and the kind of temperature even. So it works best under these circumstances if, to some degree, you decentralize power within an organization, within a setting like that. Diverse environments versus simplified or integrated environments. Diverse environments, as I say, in terms of the complex, are similar. They tend to require divisional structure and better, more suited to compartmentalized departmental structures. Whereas when we look at hostile versus munificent, it's another one of those phrases I should explain. Munificent is a friendly environment, an environment in which the market conditions are stable, pleasant, easy growth, for example, in economic terms. Hostile environments tend to be fast changing, so we tend to look for organic structures as being the more effective in those kind of situations. Whereas situations, ironically, that are extremely hostile, such as the fluid situations you find in wartime, often require a combination of centralized and decentralized. So centralized as in rigid and mechanistic, so that a response is dealt with in the lower levels in a very straightforward, rapid, simple, obedient type of format. Whereas in a situation where you're fighting a guerrilla war, for example, if you attempt to impose a highly centralized structure, you will be highly unsuccessful. You will not be able to respond to local conditions. So if you think about it in these different ways, you can see how the environment drives the structural requirements of the organization. Some other contingencies, common ones. Size is a big one we often talk about. Now, in smaller organizations, they tend to start with a simple structure. Think of the family business, the corner store. It tends to be that, you know, the person behind the counter also often cleans the floor at the 7-Eleven store, for example. But as organizations grow, they tend to begin to grow their structure, almost like the barrier reef, you could say. They develop more elaborate structures, more formalization, where procedures get formalized, hierarchy of different levels of power, and sometimes they develop decentralization, whereas in the typical small business format, the role of manager often sits with one person and every single decision is run past that single person. Technology is another one of these contingencies of a structural change. IT has allowed less formal communication to generate in firms, and has also allowed greater flexibility. For example, it allows people to work from home, or work from multiple or virtual offices. Technology means that expert input is often brought in from outside, but it does mean that mechanistic structures will work less well because there's more uncontrollable communication going on for example, through email, broadcast emails, can break down the mechanistic structures. And finally, I think that the point that's worth making, and you can see this, that structure follows, as we've said a little bit earlier, follows the environment. The environment determines the structure of an organization to some degree. The size of the company, the age of the company, and it's the type of product that it sells might determine its structure. But structure also is the slave of strategy, or should be. So you need to, as a business manager, actually think about structure as one of the variables that you can control in order to achieve the kind of outputs you want from an organization. So a typical one that I should point out is that if your aim as a business is to compete on price, for example, in the pizza market, price is extremely important determinant of success. You may well need to shift towards a less organic and more mechanistic style, because mechanistic styles tend to produce efficiencies that allow you to reduce your cost. I hope you found that interesting.